At 9:40 on the morning of March 30, 2024, two cell phones reached the same isolated stretch of road in the Oklahoma Panhandle. One belonged to 27-year-old Veronica Butler. The other belonged to 39-year-old Jillian Kelly. At 9:42, both phones stopped transmitting. 2 minutes. That was the first narrow window investigators could establish with confidence. But the scene they found offered no simple explanation for what had happened inside it. Veronica's blue Kia SUV was not parked normally along the highway. It had left the paved road and traveled roughly 25 yards down a dirt track. Blood was visible inside the vehicle. More blood was found outside. Veronica's glasses lay broken on the ground. Nearby was a hammer with a snapped handle. Jillian's purse remained in the vehicle. A spare magazine for the Taurus handgun she normally carried was still inside the bag, but the handgun itself was missing. There was evidence of a struggle. There was no sign of either woman. There were no useful surveillance cameras covering the surrounding roads. The landscape was open, flat, and sparsely populated. A person could see for miles in some directions, but that did not mean anyone had been watching at the right moment. The physical evidence established that something violent had occurred. The phone records established when it had begun. What investigators did not know was why Veronica and Jillian had stopped at that particular location, who had been waiting for them, or where the two women had been taken afterward. The answer would eventually lead police away from the abandoned Kia, through years of family court records, into the private activities of a local religious group, and finally to a recently disturbed section of earth on a 1,000-acre property. But in the first hours, the case was still officially a disappearance. And almost every person involved had a different version of why the women had been on that road. The Oklahoma Panhandle is a narrow strip of land extending west from the rest of the state. It borders Kansas, Colorado, New Mexico and Texas, and its unusual shape is the result of political boundaries established during the 19th century. For a period, the region was not formally attached to a state or organized territory. It became known as no man's land. During the era of the American frontier, weak government authority and limited law enforcement made the area attractive to fugitives, smugglers and others attempting to disappear beyond the reach of established jurisdictions. By 2024, the Panhandle was no longer lawless. But its geography still presented investigators with an old problem. Distance. Texas County covers an area larger than many major cities combined, yet its population is only around 20,000. Roads cross long sections of open farmland and prairie. Homes and businesses may be separated by miles. Cameras are limited, and witnesses are often rare. For Corners, the location connected to the planned child exchange that morning, was not a conventional town center. It was largely a rural junction where several roads met. Veronica lived across the state line in Hugoton, Kansas, approximately 50 miles away. Driving from her home to the exchange location and back would normally take around an hour and a half. She had made versions of that trip before. On March 30th, she was not going alone. Jillian Kelly had agreed to accompany her as a court-approved supervisor. Under the custody arrangement governing Veronica's visits, a certified adult had to be present when the children were exchanged. That requirement would later become important. At first, however, it seemed like a routine legal precaution. Veronica had not seen her children for several weeks. Her daughter's 6th birthday was 3 days away, and Veronica had prepared an early birthday party at home. Friends and relatives had been invited. The house had been decorated. She expected to leave Hugoton that morning, collect her 6-year-old daughter and 8-year-old son, and return in time for the celebration. The party never began. By 10:45, Veronica and Jillian had not returned. Their families initially considered ordinary explanations. A delay. A change in the exchange arrangements. A problem on the road. Then the calls went unanswered. As more time passed, relatives began driving the route themselves. At Four Corners, they found no women and no children. Several miles away, they found the Kia. Veronica Butler was 27 years old and trying to build a more stable life. Friends described her as cheerful, humorous, and creative. She enjoyed doing nails and cooking. She had found work in nursing while also taking courses at a nearby community college. Her goal was to qualify as a surgical technician. She had also opened a small business on Hugoton's Main Street called Sunflower Nutrition, named after her favorite flower. She prepared and sold food, including biscuits and gravy, and local customers spoke positively about her cooking. These details mattered because the initial investigation had to account for the possibility that Veronica had chosen to leave. Nothing in her immediate plans supported that theory. She had arranged a birthday celebration for her daughter. Friends and relatives were waiting for her. She had taken a court-certified supervisor on a scheduled trip to see her children. Her work, education, and business remained in Hugoton. Jillian Kelly's presence made a voluntary disappearance even less plausible. Jillian was married to a pastor in Hugoton. Her family and Veronica's church community had close connections. When Veronica needed someone certified to supervise the child exchanges, Jillian volunteered to complete the court process. She and her husband had 3 biological children and had also adopted a boy from South Asia. Outside her role in the church and her family life, Jillian was known for interests that did not always match the conventional image of a pastor's wife. She enjoyed motorcycles and firearms and was regarded as capable and independent. The missing Taurus handgun suggested she may have brought the weapon that morning. But the spare magazine left behind in her purse raised another question. If Jillian had voluntarily taken the gun and left, why abandon the bag, the vehicle and everything else? The physical scene did not support an unplanned departure. The broken glasses suggested sudden force. The snapped hammer suggested that whatever had occurred was not minor. And the blood showed that at least one person had been injured before the women vanished. At 12:09 p.m., law enforcement officers arrived at the vehicle. By that evening, the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation was assisting local authorities. At 7:25 p.m., officials publicly confirmed that Veronica Butler and Jillian Kelly were missing. The search expanded across the surrounding land. Officers looked for clothing, personal items, tire marks, and any indication that someone had moved away from the Kia on foot. They found no route leading clearly from the scene to either woman. Investigators therefore turned to the question that often determines the first direction of a missing person case. Who had a reason to expect Veronica that morning? The answer began with Veronica's former partner, Wrangler Rickman, the father of her 2 children. Their relationship had begun when they were young. By December 2015, before Wrangler was 20, they had their first child. The relationship later deteriorated as Wrangler developed problems involving drugs and failed to contribute consistently to the household. Veronica worked to support the family. Their second child was 8 months old when Veronica ended the relationship in December 2018. After the separation, Veronica initially held full custody. Wrangler had visitation rights. On February 27, 2019, Wrangler went to court seeking a different arrangement. The custody dispute continued for roughly 2 years and became increasingly hostile. On May 5, 2021, the court again left primary custody with Veronica and limited Wrangler to visitation. Then the outcome changed. According to the source record, allegations were presented that Veronica's brother had abused the children. Hospital records and statements were used to support those claims. When Wrangler returned to court in December 2022, the custody arrangement was reversed. Wrangler received full custody. Veronica was restricted to supervised visitation. For a mother closely attached to her children, the ruling was a major loss. But the records described her continuing to work, study and improve her financial stability while seeking greater access. A hearing was scheduled for April 17, 2024, less than 3 weeks after she disappeared. The purpose was to consider expanding her visitation rights. That hearing gave investigators an immediate reason to examine the custody dispute. Wrangler appeared to have an obvious interest in preventing Veronica from regaining access. But an apparent motive is not evidence of opportunity. When investigators checked his location, they found an alibi that was difficult to challenge. Wrangler had previously been arrested in connection with domestic violence against his pregnant current wife. After receiving probation, he was arrested again for illegally possessing a firearm. Approximately 8 or 9 days before Veronica disappeared, he had been released early under the condition that he enter a rehabilitation facility in Oklahoma City. On March 30th, the facility was monitoring him. He was more than 300 kilometers from the roadside where the Kia was found. Investigators could not place him at the scene. The most obvious suspect had a documented alibi. That did not end the relevance of the custody dispute. It changed the person at its center. With Wrangler in treatment, someone else had been caring for the children. His mother, Tiffany Adams. Tiffany Adams was not an obscure figure in Texas County. She served on the board of Cimarron Memorial Hospital, had been active in Republican Party politics at the county level, and was connected to family farming and pest control businesses. In a small rural community, those roles carried influence. Tiffany had strongly supported her son during the custody dispute. According to the case material, she used her position at the hospital to promote claims that Veronica's brother had abused the children. Investigators and court officials later concluded that records had been falsified to support those allegations. Those records had helped produce the 2022 decision that transferred custody away from Veronica. After Wrangler's later arrests, Tiffany sought custody of the children herself. The court refused. By February 2024, the dispute had escalated beyond ordinary legal argument. Tiffany allegedly told the judge handling the matter that she knew the judge's home address and the route the judge used for work. The implication was serious enough that the judge received police protection. At the same time, the court was examining the hospital records and Tiffany's conduct. The legal position she had built was beginning to weaken. Wrangler might lose custody. Tiffany had been denied custody. Veronica had a hearing approaching that could increase her access to the children. That was the situation when Tiffany arranged the March 30th exchange. When investigators interviewed her, she offered an explanation for why no exchange had taken place. Tiffany said she had called Veronica at approximately 9 o'clock that morning. According to her account, Veronica said something had come up and she would not be collecting the children. Phone records confirmed that a call had occurred. But the explanation created a problem. At the time of the call, Veronica was still in Hugoton. Afterward, she left for Oklahoma with Jillian. If Veronica had canceled the visit, why did she continue toward the exchange point with a certified supervisor? Tiffany said she did not know. She maintained that she had remained home on the morning of the disappearance. There was another inconsistency. Tiffany had originally been responsible for arranging a supervisor on her side of the exchange. She told Veronica that the person was unavailable, which was why Veronica asked Jillian to accompany her. When investigators spoke with that supervisor, the person gave a different account. The supervisor said they had been available. Tiffany had instructed them not to attend. The contradictions did not prove that Tiffany had harmed anyone. But they established that the child exchange had not failed in the simple way she described. Someone had changed the normal arrangements. Someone had ensured that Jillian, rather than the expected supervisor, would be present. And Tiffany's explanation did not account for why Veronica drove toward Four Corners after supposedly canceling the visit. On April 1st, investigators obtained authority to search Tiffany's phone. Extracting the data would take time. While specialists worked through the device, detectives continued looking for a witness who had seen something outside the digital record. 3 days after the disappearance, one appeared. In court documents, the witness was identified only as CW. CW was 16 years old. Her mother was Cora Twombly. Her stepfather was Cole Twombly, a local church leader. According to CW, Cora and Cole were members of an anti-government religious group known as God's Misfits. Members of the group reportedly embraced ideas associated with the sovereign citizen movement. They believed ordinary government authority did not apply to them and that religious law took priority over state and federal law. The group was said to include several dozen people and to meet at an abandoned school near the Twombly home. The beliefs of the organization did not by themselves establish involvement in a crime. What CW described next was far more specific. On the evening of March 29, Cora told her daughter that she and Cole would be leaving the following morning to carry out a secret mission for God's Misfits. Around noon on March 30, Cora and Cole returned. They asked CW to help clean a 1991 Chevrolet 1500 pickup truck. While cleaning the interior, CW noticed a stain on the carpet that appeared to be blood. She questioned her mother about the mission. According to CW's statement, Cora then described a coordinated attack involving herself, Cole, Tiffany Adams, Tiffany's boyfriend Tad Cullum, and another man. CW said the plan had been designed to kill Veronica Butler. Jillian Kelly, according to the account, had been killed because she accompanied Veronica. Cora allegedly explained that part of the group had blocked the route, forcing Veronica and Jillian toward another location where the others were waiting. She also said the bodies had been buried. The statement transformed the investigation. Until that point, police had a violent roadside scene, 2 missing women and contradictions in a custody dispute. CW provided names. She described a vehicle. She identified a group. She said there was a burial site. And she claimed the March 30th attack had not been the first plan. Approximately 1 month earlier, the group had allegedly considered creating a traffic accident. The plan was to place or throw a metal object into Veronica's path while she was driving and make her death appear accidental. That attempt failed because Veronica did not travel as expected. Investigators now had to determine whether a 16-year-old witness had accurately repeated a confession, misunderstood what she had heard, or provided a story influenced by family conflict. The next step was not simply to believe her. It was to test her account against evidence that existed independently. On April 4, the Federal Bureau of Investigation joined the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation and local authorities. The new focus was Tad Cullum. Not only because CW had named him, but because he controlled a location that matched the kind of place needed to hide 2 bodies. Tad Cullum was Tiffany Adams's boyfriend and, according to the case record, a central member of God's Misfits. Beginning in 2023, Tad had rented approximately 1,000 acres from a local landowner named Jamie Beasley. The arrangement began during a severe regional drought. Jamie made land available to cattle and horse owners who needed additional space, while also earning rental income. From Jamie's perspective, Tad appeared to be an unusually good tenant. He paid a full year's rent in advance. He used heavy equipment to help work the land. He saved Jamie time and money. When Tad asked to continue the lease in 2024, Jamie agreed. Investigators considered what CW had said about burial. A useful disposal site would need to meet several conditions. It would have to be isolated, large enough to prevent accidental discovery and accessible to people moving vehicles or equipment. Tad's lease provided all 3. The land was not his property, but his rental gave him a legitimate reason to be there. He could move equipment without immediately attracting attention. And because the area covered roughly 1,000 acres, a disturbed section of soil might not be noticed quickly. Police interviewed Jamie and found no indication that he had participated in the disappearance. He also had a documented account of his own movements. On the night of March 29, Jamie went to a casino with his family. They remained there until after 4 in the morning. He returned home and went to sleep at approximately 5, waking around noon. But Jamie had seen Tad before leaving for the casino. On March 29, the day before Veronica and Jillian disappeared, Tad was working on the rented land with a bulldozer. He had been turning the soil. Before leaving, Tad asked Jamie for help dealing with a tree stump that had been exposed during the work. The request seemed ordinary at the time. Jamie recalled that the bulldozer was still on the property when he left for the casino. When he woke around noon the next day, it was gone. The timing did not prove that the machine had been used to prepare or conceal a burial site. But it supported a specific part of CW's account. The group had access to remote land and heavy equipment immediately before and after the women disappeared. Investigators then obtained information from Tiffany's purchases. On February 13, more than a month before the attack, she had gone to a Walmart in Gaiman and purchased 3 prepaid phones. On March 23, 1 week before the disappearance, she purchased 5 stun guns from a local store. Prepaid phones can be difficult to connect to a particular user if they are purchased and activated without normal identifying information. But they still communicate with cellular networks. Investigators traced the final activity associated with the 3 devices. The signals ended shortly after 10 a.m. on March 30th. The location was Tad's rented land. The timing was shortly after Veronica's and Jillian's phones had stopped transmitting at 9:42. The investigation now contains several independent points of connection. CW had identified Tad and said the bodies were buried. Jamie had placed Tad and a bulldozer on the land the day before. Tiffany had purchased prepaid phones and multiple stun guns. The prepaid devices had traveled to the rented property on the morning of the disappearance. The pieces did not yet reveal exactly where to dig. But they reduced 1,000 acres to a location controlled by one of the named suspects. On April 13, investigators executed a search warrant on the property Jamie had leased to Tad. Veronica Butler and Jillian Kelly had been missing for 2 weeks. Search teams examined roads, structures, equipment paths, and areas where soil appeared different from the surrounding ground. Near a cattle shed, they found one section that appeared to have been disturbed recently. The surface was newer. The earth had been worked. Excavation began. As investigators dug deeper, they encountered material that appeared to have been placed deliberately into the hole. Concrete, rocks, mechanical parts. The debris increased the difficulty of excavation and may have been intended to disguise the disturbance or discourage anyone who found it from continuing. At a depth of more than 3 meters, investigators reached a buried freezer. Inside were the bodies of Veronica Butler and Jillian Kelly. The search also recovered clothing and items investigators believed were connected to the crime, including stun guns, yellow tape, and a knife. The location confirmed the core of CW's statement. The women had not left voluntarily. They had not become lost in the open land surrounding Four Corners. They had been taken from the roadside and transported to property controlled by a person CW had named. The medical examinations documented the scale of the attack without fully explaining the sequence. Jillian had 16 sharp force injuries. 9 were classified as deep stab wounds and 7 as more superficial injuries. She had defensive wounds on her hands. Marks on her back and shoulder were considered potentially consistent with the use of a stun gun. Veronica had approximately 30 sharp force injuries. 10 were identified as defensive wounds. She also had blunt force trauma to the back of her head, an injury investigators believed could be consistent with the broken hammer found near the abandoned Kia. The physical evidence suggested that both women resisted. It also suggested that the attack involved more than one type of weapon. Investigators arrested Tiffany Adams, Tad Cullum, Cole Twombly, and Cora Twombly. Each was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder, 2 counts of kidnapping and conspiracy to commit murder. Under Oklahoma law, first-degree murder can carry the death penalty. Prosecutors indicated that capital punishment remained under consideration. On April 24, authorities arrested a 5th person, Paul Grice. His initial charges differed from those filed against the other 4. He faced 2 counts of second-degree murder, 2 counts of kidnapping and conspiracy. The arrests answered who investigators believed had participated. They did not yet establish what each person had done. Nor did they explain how a custody dispute had expanded into a 5-person operation involving prepaid phones, stun guns, a trailer, heavy equipment and a pre-dug grave. That account emerged later, when 2 defendants decided to cooperate. In December 2024, Cora Twombly and Paul Grice entered plea agreements with prosecutors. The state agreed not to seek the death penalty against them. In exchange, they were required to describe the events surrounding the killings and testify against the remaining defendants. Their accounts provided the first detailed reconstruction of the plan. Because those details came through cooperating defendants, they remain testimony rather than an independent recording of the crime. Each witness had received a significant legal benefit. But several parts of their statements aligned with evidence investigators had already collected. The custody dispute. The failed earlier plan. The purchased devices. The remote land. The bulldozer. The buried freezer. According to the cooperating witnesses, Tiffany had spoken to Cora as early as August 2023 about wanting Veronica removed. Tiffany reportedly justified the idea by repeating claims that Veronica's brother had abused the children. She presented her intentions as an effort to protect them. By early 2024, Tiffany's legal position was becoming more difficult. Her attempt to obtain custody had failed. The hospital records used against Veronica were under scrutiny. Her son was no longer in a position to care for the children. Veronica's April hearing could improve her visitation rights and possibly strengthen her future custody claim. Tiffany had also exhausted much of the money available for the legal dispute, and her attorney had ended the representation. According to the testimony, the group first attempted to engineer a vehicle crash on February 28. When that plan failed, they developed a more direct approach. The new plan relied on the child exchange. Tiffany could tell Veronica where and when to arrive. Because the visits required supervision, the group knew another adult would probably accompany her. At first, some members reportedly questioned whether the supervisor also had to die. Tiffany allegedly argued that anyone assisting Veronica was acting against the children's interests and was therefore part of the problem. Shortly before March 30th, the group learned that the supervisor would be Jillian Kelly, a pastor's wife. The plan continued. On March 29th, Tiffany contacted Veronica and confirmed that the children could be exchanged at Four Corners the next morning. She then sent the children to stay overnight with a friend. The children were never intended to be at the exchange point. The scheduled visit was not cancelled in any meaningful sense. It had become the mechanism used to bring Veronica to an isolated road. Jillian was brought there by a second manipulation. Tiffany told Veronica that the supervisor normally arranged on Tiffany's side was unavailable. Investigators later learned that the person had been available and had been told not to attend. That left Veronica responsible for finding someone else. She chose Jillian. By the morning of March 30th, every person expected at the roadside had been selected by decisions the group had helped control. According to the cooperating defendants, members of the group used vehicles and road positioning to redirect Veronica and Jillian toward the location where the others were waiting. When the Kia stopped, the women did not immediately understand that they had entered an ambush. They expected a child exchange. Tad reportedly told them that the children were inside a horse trailer because a calf had recently been born and the children wanted more time with it. The explanation was ordinary enough to draw them closer. Veronica and Jillian approached the trailer. The group then divided its attention between them. The testimony described Tad and Tiffany restraining Jillian while other participants attacked Veronica. Veronica was struck from behind with a hammer. When she tried to turn and escape, she was struck again. The force was sufficient to break the hammer handle. The broken tool later found beside the Kia was consistent with that account. Veronica managed to move only a short distance before a stun gun was used against her. She fell, and the attack continued with a knife. Paul later said he injured his own hand during the assault. Jillian witnessed at least part of what happened to Veronica. She was forced into the horse trailer. Paul testified that when he returned toward the trailer, Jillian had blood on the back of her head and was no longer conscious. According to the account attributed to Tad, he considered another method of killing her before using a knife. The autopsy findings were consistent with separate attacks involving blunt force, sharp force injuries, and possible stun gun contact. Afterward, the women and items connected to the attack were placed in the trailer. The group transported them to Tad's rented land shortly after 10 a.m. That timing corresponded with the final signals from the prepaid phones. At the property, the women's bodies, their clothing, and several of the tools used in the attack were placed inside a large freezer. The freezer was sealed with tape and lowered into the pit Tad had prepared. The group then covered it with soil, concrete, rocks, and discarded mechanical parts. The bulldozer allowed them to move and replace large amounts of earth quickly. Their decision to bury the weapons and clothing with the bodies created one concentrated location containing the victims and evidence of the crime. It also meant that when investigators found the freezer, they recovered more than human remains. They recovered part of the plan itself. Paul described Tiffany laughing after the burial was complete. He characterized it as the most disturbing laugh he had heard. That detail came from a cooperating participant and cannot be independently measured. It became part of the prosecution's account of Tiffany's state of mind. A more consequential disclosure concerned what the group had allegedly planned before the attack changed course. According to the testimony, the original intention was to incapacitate Veronica and Jillian with stun guns, place them in the freezer while they were still alive, seal it and bury it. The physical evidence showed that this was not ultimately how the women died. But the allegation demonstrated that the freezer had not been selected only after the attack. It had been incorporated into the plan before the women arrived. The case did not depend on one confession or one forensic test. It developed through accumulation. The Kia showed that a violent encounter had occurred. The phones narrowed the beginning of that encounter to the 2 minutes between 9:40 and 9:42. The custody records identified a conflict that had intensified over several years. Wrangler Rickman's location removed the first obvious suspect from physical participation. Tiffany's account of the cancelled visit did not fit Veronica's actions. The assigned supervisor's statement showed that Tiffany had altered the normal exchange arrangement. CW provided names, a vehicle, a group, and a claim that the bodies had been buried. Jamie Beasley placed Tad and a bulldozer on the leased land immediately before the disappearance. Retail records documented the purchase of 3 prepaid phones and 5 stun guns. Cellular data placed the prepaid devices on Tad's property shortly after the attack. Fresh soil led investigators to the grave. The freezer contained the women, clothing, and items linked to the crime. The medical findings were consistent with parts of the later testimony. No single fact carried the complete case. Together, they turned a disputed family narrative into a coordinated prosecution. On October 7, prosecutors announced additional charges connected to the treatment and concealment of the bodies against Tiffany, Tad, and Cole. Tiffany also faced a child neglect charge. According to information later disclosed, her grandchildren had been with her when she purchased some of the supplies connected to the plan, including tape and items intended to restrain or silence the victims. The children could not have understood the purpose of those purchases. Years later, they would have to understand something much larger. Their grandmother had claimed that every action she took was intended to protect them. The evidence described a campaign that used their custody, their schedules, and even the promise of seeing them as tools. By October 2025, Tiffany Adams had also entered a plea agreement. The agreement removed the possibility of a death sentence. She received life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, along with additional consecutive terms totaling 24 years. The sentence meant that she was unlikely ever to leave prison. The remaining defendants, Tad Cullum and Cole Twombly, had not accepted plea agreements in the source record. The Texas County District Attorney announced an intention to seek the death penalty against both men. Their trials were scheduled for October 19, 2026, and February 22, 2027. At that stage, the prosecution's case against them was expected to rely heavily on physical evidence, digital records, and testimony from the defendants who had agreed to cooperate. For a jury, the central issue would not be whether Veronica and Jillian had been killed. The discovery of the bodies and the medical findings established that. The disputed questions would concern individual responsibility. Who designed the plan? Who performed which act? Which witnesses were credible? How much weight should be given to statements from people who had avoided possible death sentences by agreeing to testify? The prosecution could point to evidence that existed before the plea agreements, phone activity, purchase records, the rented land, the excavation, and the items recovered from the freezer. The cooperating witnesses could explain how those pieces were connected. The defense could challenge their motives, their memory, and their attempts to reduce their own responsibility. The final legal record would therefore be built from two forms of proof: evidence that could be physically documented, and testimony from people who admitted that they had participated. The two forms did not always carry equal weight. But in this case, they repeatedly pointed toward the same sequence of preparation. In March 2025, nearly 1 year after the killings, Veronica's mother, Amanda, filed a civil action against the 5 people accused of participating. The filing did not specify a final compensation amount in the source material. The legal strategy appeared designed not only to obtain damages, but potentially to reach property and other assets owned by the defendants. The criminal case focused on Veronica and Jillian. The consequences extended further. Jamie Beasley had rented land to Tad without knowing it would become a burial site. Investigators found no evidence that Jamie had participated, and his casino trip helped establish that he was away during the relevant period. That did not protect him from suspicion in the community. Because the bodies were found on his property, some people continued to connect him publicly to the case. Parents reportedly asked that a school bus no longer stop near his home. The land that had supported his livelihood became known primarily as the place where 2 women had been buried. On July 3, 2025, Jamie died at his home at the age of 52. The source record did not establish that his death was caused by the public reaction to the case. But it described the pressure and isolation he experienced after the search. Another local figure, Judge Vincent Forbes, had a separate connection to Tad. Several years before the murders, Vincent had invested approximately $30,000 in a lumber company with him. The business relationship appeared successful, and Vincent considered Tad a friend. After Tad's arrest, a reporter asked whether he had ever sensed anything disturbing about him. Vincent said he had not. He described Tad as friendly and funny and said he could not believe Tad was involved. The statement was interpreted by some viewers as a defense of an accused murderer. Public criticism followed. Under pressure from local officials, Vincent resigned from his judicial position. His comments did not prove that he knew anything about the crime. They revealed something less dramatic but still significant. Before the arrests, the people accused in the case had ordinary roles: tenant, business partner, hospital board member, church leader, boyfriend, mother, grandmother. Their public identities did not resemble the operation later described in court. That gap between familiarity and evidence affected nearly everyone around them. The most lasting consequences belonged to Veronica's children. They lost their mother. They also lost the stability of believing that the adults fighting over their custody had been acting for their protection. The planned exchange on March 30th was presented to Veronica as an opportunity to see them. In reality, the children had already been sent elsewhere. They were not delayed. They were not waiting in a trailer with a newborn calf. They had never been brought to four corners. That fact clarifies the structure of the entire case. The child exchange was not interrupted by violence. The exchange itself was false. Every procedural detail that should have made the visit safer was used to make the women more predictable. The date came from the custody schedule. The location came from the person controlling access to the children. The requirement for supervision guaranteed that Veronica would not be alone. The unavailable supervisor ensured that Jillian would accompany her instead. The promise that the children were nearby persuaded both women to leave the relative safety of the vehicle. The family court system had created rules intended to manage conflict. The group identified those rules and used them to control the victim's movements. In the first hours of the investigation, police had only a damaged vehicle and 2 silent phones. The scene showed violence, but it did not explain the purpose behind it. The custody file supplied the conflict. Tiffany's statements supplied the first contradictions. CW supplied the names. The prepaid phones supplied movement. The leased land supplied a location. The fresh soil supplied the final direction. The truth did not arrive through one dramatic admission. It appeared in separate records that should not have connected at all. A phone call at 9. 2 devices shutting down at 9:42. A supervisor told to stay home. A bulldozer moved before noon. 3 prepaid phones going silent on a 1,000-acre property. And beneath more than 3 meters of earth, a freezer prepared before either woman knew that the visit had been a trap. The evidence did more than identify what happened after Veronica and Jillian reached four corners. It showed that the most important part of the crime had occurred earlier. The road had been selected. The land had been prepared. The children had been removed. And a routine visit between a mother and her children had been turned into something it was never meant to be.